Hi scholars, today you're going to learn about points, lines, rays, and angles, and this is our introduction to our geometry unit, which is the most fun in 4th grade, after financial literacy, of course, because that means market day is coming. But these are some of the terminology that you're going to be learning, so please copy this down. The teak is 4.6a. After you're done copying, just put your pencil down and watch the video. Even if in the video I say, oh, copy this in your journal or try this question or whatever, just keep your pencil down and just kind of work through it. Like, just watch the video. Don't worry about it. All right, so let's get started. Hi scholars, today we are going to talk about some geometry concepts. This is TEAG 4.6a. It says, I can identify points, lines, line segments, rays, angles, perpendicular and parallel lines. So I'm going to talk about each one step by step, and then we will look at some examples together. The first thing we're going to learn about is point, and it's basically exactly what it is. It is an exact location in space. So if you have something like this, and you put an A by it, you call it point A. So if you have many points and to identify each one separately, you put a letter by it. So you can say point A, point B, point C. The next thing we're going to learn about is what is a line. A line is a straight path of points that continues without end in both directions. So if you have 2 points, there is a line that can go through it, and there will be arrows at the end. The arrows mean that it keeps going, because the definition says without end in both directions. So if you're trying to show that this is a line, it has to have arrows on both sides. If it doesn't, then it's actually going to be considered something else. So the way to read this, you call it line AB, and the way to write it is you write AB and then you put a line above it with arrows at the end. It's very important you put the arrows. The arrows is what makes the people know that you're talking about a line. And I always remember it as Buzz Lightyear from Toy Story, because the part where he jumps and he spreads his wings, he says to infinity and beyond. So when his wings open, it's as if he's saying it goes on forever. So that's how you can remember what a line is. It goes on forever. Let's look at some examples. So this has arrows on both ends, so we know it's a line, and there's an M and an N. So we call it line MN, and this is how we write it. This one is another line. It has 2 arrows. Q and R are the points in it. So you call it line QR. This one's going this way, but it's still a line because both ends have arrows, so you call it line YZ. Okay, let's learn about the next one. The next one is called a line segment. A line segment is a part of a line between 2 endpoints. So notice this is different than a line. A line has arrows and it goes on forever. This one is kind of like saying this is stopping. The 2 points show that it's not going to keep on going. This is where it starts, this is where it ends, or this is where it starts and this is where it ends. So when you see the points, or even if you don't see the points and you just know that it's a straight line and there's no arrows, you call it line segment DE, or you can read it the other way, line segment ED. And I forgot to mention that in the previous video about the line. You can also read it the other way too. And so the way to write it is you write DE and you just draw a line without arrows, or you say ED and you draw a line without arrows. Okay, let's look at some examples. We know that this is a line segment because of the 2 dots, the 2 points, so you call it line segment JK, or you can read it this way, line segment KJ. Here's another one. We know it's a line segment because there's no arrows and there's 2 points only. So line segment PQ or line segment QP. Here's the last one. We know it's a line segment, again, because of the points and there's no arrows. So line segment SR or line segment RS. Okay, let's look at some examples. We know that this is a line segment because of the two dots, the 2 points, so you call it line segment JK, or you can read it this way, line segment KJ. Here's another one. We know it's a line segment because there's no arrows and there's 2 points only. So line segment PQ or line segment QP. Here's the last one. We know it's a line segment, again, because of the points and there's no arrows. So line segment SR or line segment RS. Okay, this next one is called a ray. Now this is different than array because arrays are what we learned in multiplication and they have dimensions. This is called a ray, and I always connect it to the rays of the sun because it's pretty much a very long, forever going almost line. And so the definition of a ray is it's a part of a line that has one endpoint and continues without end in one direction. So this side has the arrow, so this is your starting point and you keep going. So in that situation, you can only read it one way. You start with the starting point and you say ray FG. You cannot say ray GF because then that's like saying this is the starting and it's going this way, and it's not. So you say ray FG, and the way you write it is you write FG and then you put a line with an arrow on one side only. Okay, time for some examples. Let's look at the first one. So we know this is a ray because there's a point here and it's forever going on the other end. So you call it ray MN. And you have to make sure the starting comes first and then the ending, the forever ending part, never ending part on the next part. Over here, this is ray BC. B is the starting point, C is forever, so BC. Now notice this one. It starts at T and then forever goes this way. So you would write TU and you would show the arrow this way. Okay, it's time for checkpoint. I want you to press pause after these directions and I want you to point to each one of these, say what it is, and explain how you know. Okay, so here are the answers. This is a point. This is a line. And as evidence, I just circled the 2 ends, the 2 arrows, to show that I know it's a line because a line goes on forever. Remember, to infinity and beyond. This is a line segment, and I circled the 2 points to show that it's a segment, it's a part of a line. This one is a ray, and I circled 1 arrow to show that a ray is forever going on one side and starts on the other side. Okay, checkpoint part 2. I want you to write down how would you write all of these and identify them. So go ahead and press pause after this and then press play to check your answers. Okay, checkpoint part 2. I want you to write down how would you write all of these and identify them. So go ahead and press pause after this and then press play to check your answers. Okay, here are the answers. So this is point C, very basic. Point J, another basic. This one is a ray, so there's only one way to write it. The starting point is H, the forever part is I, so you would write HI and the arrow going that way. This one is a line segment, so you can go this way or that way. So you would say line segment NO, and you would just draw a line, no arrows, or line segment ON, and just a line on top again. This one is a line. It's forever going because of the 2 arrows, so it can be line WX or line XW, and notice these have arrows on top. This one is a line segment, So it can be line segment EF, or you can read it the other way, line segment FE. And then the last one, this is a ray. Starting point is R, forever part is S, so it's ray RS. Okay, let's learn about angles now. Now, if you notice in this definition, it has the word rays, which we talked about. A ray is a line with a point, and it keeps on going in the other direction. Or there's also the word line segment, which is a part of a line joined by 2 points. Okay, so an angle is 2 rays. So it's like saying you have this and this connected, okay? Or 2 line segments. So you could have this and this connected, okay? They both share the same endpoint. This is their endpoint right here. The shared endpoint is called the vertex. So this right here is a vertex. This right here is a vertex. You kind of sometimes call those like the pointy part. That's fine too, but the geometry term is called a vertex. So let's look at an angle with these. So if you have 2 line segments or 2 rays and you connect them, they're sharing the same endpoint right here. So here is my angle. I can have a very tiny angle, like the space inside can be very small, or it can be like this, or it can be very, very huge, like this. It can also be like this. This is still considered an angle. Okay, so let's look at some angles and how you would write it. So again, it is 2 rays connected, or 2 line segments that share the same endpoint. So if these are my 2 rays or line segments and they have the same endpoint, the endpoint is called a vertex. This would be the vertex. So right here, or it could be like much smaller. It could be very wide, or it could be very wide open, like that. Okay? Notice the Q is where the vertex is. This is very important. That's why I underlined it in red, because when you write it, you draw an angle and you write PQR. Your vertex must be, the vertex letter must be in the middle, because that tells people you are starting here, this is the end point of your angle, and then that's the other side. So angle PQR, 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 PQR. You can also read it the other way. Angle RQP. Angle RQP, angle RQP, angle RQP. Notice that I underlined the middle, the vertex one in red, so you can see this one is, the Q is always in the middle of both of them. If you just make up a random order like QPR, that actually creates a whole different kind of angle. If you were to say angle QPR, then you're saying basically that the angle looks like this. And that's not what we're talking about. So we can't do that. You can also just call it angle Q. That lets people know this is the angle part of it. Let's look at some examples. Let's look at this first one. We know it's an angle because there's 2 rays connected sharing the same endpoint. This is my endpoint, so that means that has to be in the middle. So when I write it, I'm going to draw an angle and write angle M, N, O. The N is in the middle. Or you can write angle O-N-N. As long as N is in the middle. Let's look at the next one. I know this is an angle because it's two rays connected. This can be angle RST or angle TSR or even angle S. Sorry, this top one here can also be angle N. Okay, let's look at some more examples. The C is in the middle, so it's going to be angle ACB or angle BCA or angle C. This one doesn't have anything over here, so you would just call it angle X. Okay, so now that you've watched it, let's write down some definitions. You learned what a point is. That is an exact location in space. Okay. The way you would draw it is like you would put a dot and like write a letter, and the way you would read it is you would say that is point A, and you would also, like if you were to write it out, you would also write point A like that. So like I'm going to put R for reading it, W for writing it. Okay? Another example of something that you learned is a line. Now a line is a straight path of points that continue in both directions. Without an end. So I always think of Buzz Lightyear from Toy Story, To Infinity and Beyond. So here's what it looks like. You have your two lines, or 2 points, and then when you show an arrow, you're showing it goes on forever. So the way to read it, like if someone drew this and wrote this, the way to read it is I would say this is line BC. Or you can say line CB. Okay? And then the way to write it is if you draw a line with 2 arrows and you put BC underneath it, or do the same thing and write CB, this means this is what you're seeing. Okay? Third thing is a line segment. Okay, a line segment is a part of a line between 2 endpoints. Okay, so in this situation, you have your points, but the line doesn't keep going. It means that's your stopping point. So the way to read it is I would say this is line segment DE, or I would say this is line segment ED. Okay, and then to show it, like writing it, you would just draw a line and write DE or ED. But there will be no arrows because you're showing that it stops. All right, we're going to go to the right side of our journal. A ray is a part of a line that has one endpoint. And continues without end only in one direction. So here's an example of what it would look like. This side goes on forever, but this side doesn't. So FG, let's just call it FG. The way to read it would be, I would say that's ray FG, or ray, actually, that's the only way to read it, because you're not going to say GF. The last letter is showing the direction it's going. And then the way to write it is you would draw a ray like that, and then draw an arrow that way. All right. One last thing is an angle. Okay? An angle is formed by two rays or two line segments that have the same endpoint. Okay, that endpoint can also be called a vertex. Okay, so here's an example. Here is a ray, here is another ray, and this is where they share the endpoint, and this is called a vertex. Okay, so this part that I'm about to show you is very important because there is a very specific way to read it. I can call this angle Q. Where the vertex is, or the endpoint, that's what you use to name the angle. You can't call it angle P, you can't call it angle R. You can only call it angle Q. You can also say angle PQR as long as the Q is in the middle. Or you can say angle RQP because the Q is in the middle. Okay? The way to write it is you would draw an angle, and you could do this. You could write this or this. Now there are three types of angles. Okay, we have acute. That's where it's very narrow. Okay, there's not a lot of space in between. So I'm just drawing a bunch of different little examples. Okay, then you have a right angle, and we're going to study these more in detail. A right angle can only look like a letter L, upside down, backwards, whatever, but there's no variety. There's variety in an acute angle. Right angle is pretty much that same way but turned around in multiple ways. And then you have your obtuse, which is extremely wide open. Okay? And that's it for your notes.